Elections are won by votes and money. Are we going to vote tomorrow for Ron Paul? Yeah!
Help me in welcoming the only man who can cure this sickness, Dr. Ron Paul. I don't know if I have to give a speech. He did such a good job. I'll give you my 2 cents worth anyway. So.
Marry me, Ron Paul!
I do want to introduce my wife of 55 years, Carol. Is with us tonight. What a wonderful evening and a wonderful audience. We've spent a little bit of time today, traveling across the state, and the crowds have been big and enthusiastic. Michigan State, I think they said there were 4,000 people there. Can you this enthusiasm and get some delegates out of this state. That's it is wonderful, the reception we're getting, and it's across the country. And I think there's a real need for something different. And I think people are recognizing that the system that we've had, not for the past 3 years, I go after our president as much as anybody else, but it isn't the last 3 years that brought us to this crisis. And the last administration was far from my favorite, let me tell you. But it didn't occur there. It's occurred over a long time. Liberties aren't lost overnight. And we have changed our foreign policy, we've changed our monetary policy, we've changed our fiscal policy and our spending policy and entitlement system, the welfare state, and it didn't occur overnight. The freedoms that we've lost have been eroded, and it's gradual and steady. But now we're at a crisis point. There's not much more to lose, because when a president announces that it can assassinate an American citizen, and the Congress can give him the power to arrest all Americans anytime, any place, we're coming desperately close to saying that we're losing, if we haven't lost already, our republic. So it's time to stand up. The American people are waking up. They're letting the message be heard. Unfortunately, Washington, most of Washington, other candidates, they're pretty much sleeping. They don't know what we're talking about. And I think the message has to be loud and clear, and make sure they hear us. Along with the introduction of the method how they undermine the wealth of the middle class, whether it's through taxation or through inflation, it also introduced the age of endless wars, and we've been fighting wars ever since, but also the entitlement system. The entitlement system is something that we have to address, and it's been around for quite a bit, especially entitled to our right to our life and a right to our liberty. We ought to have a right and entitled to the fruits of our labor. But today, entitlement means that people, a certain segment of society, and it's nearly about half, that they are entitled to the wealth of the other half. And it doesn't work very well because right now there are more people entitled to the other half, and the other half is shrinking, and the wealth is dwindling, and the production is down. There's no other state in the country that probably understands it better. The jobs aren't here. The jobs are going overseas. In the last 10 years, there has been a 30 million increase in our population. Essentially no new manufacturing jobs. And we're now a debtor nation. Now you say, well, why didn't we have all this trouble 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? We were so wealthy because a free society is the wealthiest society. We have the largest middle class. And it takes a long time to undermine and spend the wealth and borrow to the hilt. But we're at a different point now. Because now, with all the consumption without the production, we are a debtor nation. We're the biggest debtor nation in the history of the world. We owe more money to foreigners than any other country has. We owe international debt $16 trillion. We owe foreigners $3 trillion, and we can't pay the bills. It's a debt crisis. And you know what they think in Washington? Almost everybody, some talk differently, but if anybody was serious in Washington and understood this was a debt crisis, wouldn't you think they ought to cut something? Cut some spending? That I think in the very first year we should cut the budget by $1 trillion. Five departments and reverse our spending levels back about 5 years. Instead, they have projected increases forever and ever. So they talk a little bit about cutting, and they say, well, yeah, we spend too much here, too much there. So the Congress tries to do something, and they flunk, and they say, well, the super committee, more money and borrow more money. What if you don't have a job? Or what if you maxed out on your credit cards? Or what if you can barely make your payments? You can't spend more money. And they say, well, we have an answer for that. Then the government has to spend more money. Well, where's the government going to? Well, we'll raise taxes. What if you can't raise taxes? That'll be a problem. Let's borrow more money. Well, there's a limit. Interest rates will go up if you borrow too much. They have a secret. We'll just print the money. And then we'll keep spending it. And that is supposed to be the solution. So they actually believe that it's absolutely necessary to spend more money under these conditions, and it's wrong to back off and save. But capital comes from saving. Capital doesn't come from increasing the money supply, and it's a major fallacy. If an individual is deeply in debt and living beyond their means, or if you're in a company and you're going bankrupt and you don't have anybody who's going to bail you out, you know you have to cut back. And if the debt is consuming you, there's no economic growth. So debt has to be liquidated. You have to get the prices back down. You have to get back to scratch and go back to work. An individual has to cut spending, sell a car, get another job, pay down the debt, then get back to economic growth again. But they don't believe that is true to government. I happen to believe that is true. If you live beyond your means as a nation, you'll live beneath your means. Is even if you could convince them, the politicians can't cut anything because everybody has a special interest. And for decades now, they have been rewarded. If they voted for the spending and they voted to bring something back home, they got rewarded and got reelected. But it's different now. The recessions were shorter-lived, and there was still some wealth, but we've undermined the system. We've undermined the dollar. We've undermined the principles. We're overextended just about everywhere, so it's not going to work. That's why this has to be addressed in a fundamental way. You can't tinker around the edges. You can't tinker and say we're going to cut the proposed increases. So we have to look at this entitlement system. The entitlement system doesn't work. The entitlement system is based on a presumption that we can help people who are having trouble. We don't want anybody to fall through the cracks. And under those conditions, the freer the country, the larger the middle class there is. And we did at one time have the largest middle class in the history of the world and the richest middle class. But that's not true anymore. If there is wealth around and you see it, believe me, there is debt behind it, and that's why it's unsustainable. So this is the reason we have to challenge it, whether it's for housing or education or whatever. The system is not working. I think that's why a lot of people are paying a lot more attention to the thoughts of personal liberty and economic liberty. But in medical care in particular, it's a real mess. I had experience of practicing medicine before we had it, and medicine has gotten much worse. And everything government has done has interfered with the doctor-patient relationship, and that is what should drive medicine, the doctor and the patient relationship. When that happened, the doctor, lo and behold, always charged the least. Now, when there's third-party payment, whether it's insurance companies or government or whatever, doctors, hospitals, everybody, the forms are filled out. Our house in order and our financial shape again. We do have to cut. But the overseas spending, which I talk about a whole lot, doesn't get cut unless we change our philosophy. We have to change our philosophy about the entitlement system. If nobody will consider the fact that we as individuals should be more responsible and not assume somebody else will take care of us from cradle to grave, that attitude, won't allow us to do the things necessary. We'll just get deeper and deeper into poverty. They'll keep spending more money to our campaign than 4 times more than all the Republicans put together and twice as much as the president gets. So that's a pretty strong indication that it also reflects the fact that maybe it helps a little bit having served in the military for a few years myself. It was a total of 5 years that I ended up serving when I was called, and I remember it very well because I was living in my residency. To leave, but I decided I better go, and so I went, and that was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I went and served and became a flight surgeon, and we moved to Texas for that. But at that time there was no declaration of war. It just goes on, and then the presidents go to war. That was one of the things the revolution was fought about, because the king would declare the war and tax the colonists. And then the military came and occupied our country, and would go into their houses and occupy our houses. And matter of fact, they would go into houses without search warrants, just as our government's doing to us right now. And we should reject that. The wars have been going on for so long, and nobody actually knows exactly why we're there. At least they don't tell us. Why were we in Iraq? Oh, because of weapons of mass destruction, because of Al-Qaeda. No weapons of mass destruction, no Al-Qaeda, and then we got in there. Guess what? Al-Qaeda's in Iraq right now, and they had no weapons of mass destruction. Now Iraq is more aligned with Iran. And they're more allies because just of the politics of the nature that we have too many unintended consequences of these things that we do around the world, just as it is in economics. Unintended consequences. We want to do good for people, we end up doing bad for the people. And going overseas, they tell us they're supposed to do this, for the benefit of the people. But it really doesn't work. There's a lot of other special interests involved. There's a lot of special interests from oil to beer. And he had a lot of opportunities to put in the troops. But he was a military man. He knew what it was like. And I just think he was more skeptical of this rapid response by putting troops in. Dien Bien Phu fell. The French were defeated there. And it wasn't until the next administration that the troops went in. But Eisenhower said, no, I'm not going to send the troops in there. There was a crisis in the Taiwan Straits, and that had to do with... certain that we don't need it for our national defense. Our national security is not in threat, and our financial situation is so bad. The last thing we need is to speed and send the troops and get further involved, because we're already involved in all those countries over there. Further involved in Syria. It makes no sense whatsoever to get involved there, because there's too many. There's too many that are so anxious because they're anxious actually to go to Iran. Now that is about the most foolish thing in the world. Some of the reason that we get involved over there has to do with Israel. And of course we propped up a dictator. We've tried to buy friendship with Israel in Egypt, spent about $40 billion. What happened? It didn't work. The people finally rejected it. Threw out that guy. Guess what? Al-Qaeda's in Egypt now. They're in Libya now. So this thing backfires on us. I think it hurts Israel, to tell you the truth. I think Israel can take care of themselves. They have nuclear weapons. They're a powerhouse. But unfortunately, I think it backfires on them because they can't do anything without our permission, and they can't have peace treaties with their neighbors. And if they want to fight, if they think they have to have a border dispute, I think it should be their business and make their decision. But this idea that we have to be trapped, and we have to pay the bills, and we have to be vulnerable, I just don't think it's the right way to do it. Of course, that was used as an easy excuse to do a lot of things they had been planning on doing. In 1998, the policy of this country changed to, because I remember talking about it on the House floor in 1998, and the lack of wisdom about going in there. But that finally came about. 10 days after 9/11, then a bill was brought to the floor. That bill had been floating around for quite a few years. And they brought it up and passed it. It was an hour or so of discussion. And that was that infamous Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was not very patriotic. It's a disaster. It destroyed, essentially, our Fourth Amendment rights. Now, they can come into our houses without search warrant, and it's not getting much better. And it's also the authority used to intrude on our personal privacy and the so-called protection that they give us under the TSA at the airports. But it also, what it does though, it allows searches and seizures without proper search warrants. So this makes people who look a little bit different more vulnerable. This has an immigration connotation. People coming into this country, they look different, and they're going to be more vulnerable because they don't have to get proper search warrants. But the Patriot Act is very, very damaging. And it has led to other things too. Today, of course, we had the president announced 1 year ago that he's allowed to assassinate American citizens just because he might be thought to be associated with somebody who might be a bad guy. I mean, an associated forces. And of course, he's done it on 3 occasions, 3 assassinations of American citizens without real charges, without any charges. But he declared that they were the enemy of the country, and therefore this was the best thing to do. And then again, with the National Defense Authorization Act, the president can use the military to arrest anybody. And this means anybody, but there have to be associated forces, but nobody knows how to define it. But that is interpreted to mean by many, oh, associated means, you mean if I visit a web page, or I get certain email, or I attend a certain meeting, or I speak out, or I write a book, and it sounds like it's subversive, that you can be arrested by the military and put in prison indefinitely without a trial? I mean, this is very serious. This is undermining the basic principles of a true republic. So I believe, very sincerely, for our republic to survive, those laws have to be removed from the book. Are great, and the people are recognizing the conditions of this country are so different from 5 years ago, but in many ways in a positive way. Today, this message of liberty is much better received than ever before because people know we're in an economic crisis and there are big problems, and they know they're sick and tired of the wars, and the foreign policy is deeply flawed. And believe it or not, the overwhelming majority of the American people now are demanding an audit of the Federal Reserve System. encouraging. And I am very encouraged by the different groups coming together and looking at these. They're by far not just Republicans, because I have to do a little converting with some of the Republicans now and then myself. But they're independents, there's Democrats, there are Republicans that are coming together. The people who are sincere and believe in the Constitution are coming together. And I see this as very, very positive. And I'm really excited by the number of young people. The college campuses are alive and well, I'll tell you. But it's usually a smaller group. It was a smaller group that led our revolution. And it was a small group that works on the other end. It was a small group that led the communist revolution too. And too often the people come along. Now, in a positive sense, that what Samuel Adams said, that it doesn't require a majority, but it requires a minority, an irate minority, and a tireless minority, willing to work diligently spreading brush fires of liberty in the minds of men. And that is what we need to do. Liberty is that if your goal in life is similar to mine, and I think our goal should be seeking virtue and excellence in our own lives to get our own satisfaction. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be wealthy to do that. Excellence and virtues are very, very important. And if governments decide, yes, that's a good idea, we're going to make you a virtuous person, and we're going to have you do this, and we're going to make the world more virtuous, and we're going to use force to do it, it's a complete failure. Once the government embarks on that goal, it destroys liberty. And that's what they've been doing. Governments have assumed that they can protect all of us from ourselves, like any mistakes that we made. But when governments encroach on that very personal thing about how we want to run our lives, then they get involved in religious values and personal values and economic matters, and there's nothing left. So if you want to have that goal, we have to struggle to protect those principles of liberty. And we were given this. We were given the greatest amount of liberty ever and the richest ever. This was a great test, and now we're letting it slide by unless we revive that and restore the Constitution and restore the Republic is what we need. The concept of liberty is an issue that I've read and studied about and thought about, and I think it answers so many questions. Obviously not all the questions, because there's always going to be some problems. But turning so much over to government, whether it's housing or medical care or how we live, it just leads to more trouble. But if you understand the concept of liberty, and liberty is our own, and we have rights and we have responsibilities. But it should not be divisive. Some people shouldn't want liberty for one reason, but not the other. Somebody else wants it for this reason, but not this. Why can't it be both social liberty, religious liberty, as well as economic liberty? It should bring us all together. Prosperity, we protect civil liberties, and we understand about how people tend to come together under the banner of freedom, and we have a foreign policy that defends this country, and we don't meddle in the affairs of others. Maybe people would want to emulate us. Just think, though, over these many years of the bombs having been dropped and all the force, whether it was in Korea or Vietnam and all these places in the Middle East, and it's all backfiring and bankrupting us. It would be so much better. I can't help but think about those years I was in the military. I never had to go to Vietnam, but it was so fruitless. It lasted so long, and so many people died. And then finally we lost. We had to come home. We lost 60,000 military personnel. And we finally came home. And guess what? The world in the Far East didn't go communist. They came more westernized when we didn't use force. And now we trade with Vietnam, we travel there, we invest there, they come over here. Just think of what has been... Just think of the success of what was achieved in peace that could never have been achieved with war. We need to have more confidence in a peaceful mission. Benjamin Franklin said, "Those who expect to reap the benefits of liberty must undergo the fatigue of supporting it." I don't think you have to use the word sacrifice. I don't think fighting for liberty is a lot of sacrifice. Even economically speaking, everybody say, you really have to sacrifice if you're going to get our house in order. No, the people who live beyond their means, who got themselves into bankruptcy, they should go bankrupt. You shouldn't have to suffer. You should be able to or whatever, and we deregulate society and get the Fed off our backs and out of our pockets and get rid of the income tax, that I don't think is a sacrifice. I think that would be a real blessing. But we are challenged, and I'm an optimist now as I travel the country, and compared to 5 years ago, the country is much more alert. They're much more enthusiastic. I think this young generation will make a difference, but we need to band together. We can't always say now, well, if we keep doing this, we're going to pass all these problems on to the next generation. I don't think we can say that anymore. I think it's this generation right now. It's us. It's for our business to get this